But one thing that happened, though, was that she actually got me into another school that was way far away from my neighborhood. It was actually a kind of an upper middle class school. And there, for the first time, I met kids from a whole different part of the city who weren't like me, who weren't from poor conditions. And I became very good friends with those kids. And I would go over their houses, and I would be amazed. You know, a lot of these kids were young white kids. I met Italian kids for the first time. I met Jewish kids for the first time. I met Asian kids, not for the first time, because actually in my neighborhood there were lots of Asian gangs. Chinatown was right near my neighborhood, so I often knew Asian kids. And there was a lot of gang activity between Asians and black gangs in my neighborhood. So I knew a lot of Asians, but this was the first time I was ever around Jewish kids, Italian kids, Irish kids, and we became friends. You know, New York is one of the most diverse places I've ever been to. I had friends of all races and all backgrounds. And it was a wonderful thing. But what happened was I began to spend a lot of time at my wealthier friends' homes, and I didn't want to go back to my neighborhood because I actually saw, like when I stayed over their houses at night, I saw that they actually lived in a kind of a wonderful way that I didn't live. You know, it was funny to me. You know, my mother, being a single mother, had a full-time job, and so we would come home ourselves. I had to bring my sister home, and we would come home and just hang out at home until she got home from work. But we never did things like eat together as a family. My mother was always kind of busy. She would cook for us and then like go in her room and watch TV or something. And that's not a shot against my mother at all. My mother was a wonderful mother who was doing the best that she could do under very difficult circumstances. But we never did things like eat around the table as a family. We never like went to museums. We never really, I don't remember us ever really having many in-depth conversations and stuff. And so when I went to spend the night at my friends' houses, it was kind of like I was being opened up to a whole new world. We would eat breakfast in the morning together around the table. We'd eat dinner at night together. I would do my homework with my friend's mother, something I never did with my mother because I think my homework was actually too confusing for my mother. My mother didn't know math. She wasn't a very good reader. So I would do homework with my friends' mothers. And I began to really like the way they lived their lives. And so I actually would not come home. Like I would come up with excuses to spend the night at my friends' houses and not come home. And this made my mother very angry. And she would start to do things like punish me and tell me if I didn't come home at this time of night, you know, by this time of day, I would get in trouble. But I was kind of starting to get to that age when I wasn't listening to my mother very well anymore, and I would start to defy her rules, and I would stay out at night and stay at my friends' houses. And it eventually caught up to me one night. It was New Year's night, which is really the reason why I wrote this book, when my mother demanded that I come home like by 10 o'clock, and I was enjoying my time with my friends so much that I decided no, I wasn't going to. And she told me, she said, if you don't come home by 10 o'clock, you know, when you get here, you know there's going to be a beating waiting for you. And my mother was someone who beat us quite often as kids. It's very interesting. People ask me often, like, you know, if you were a parent today, would you beat your kids or would you hit your kids? And I always have kind of a mixed answer because, you know, I know why my mother did it. I don't, again, I have a lot of respect for my mother. I think that she grew up under very difficult conditions herself. But I found that it often made me afraid to actually come home if I knew a beating was waiting. So that's why I often stayed out as well, because this is my mother's form of punishment. So this night I said, okay, you know, if you're gonna beat me, I'm gonna come home even later. And we would have this back and forth, and she would get mad at me constantly. But I was getting to be that age where actually the beatings weren't so difficult anymore because I was actually getting to be a little bit stronger than my mother, and it became harder for her to kind of punish me in this way. But still, I chose to not come home that night on time like I was supposed to. And what happened was I wound up leaving my friend's house at around midnight, close to 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was walking home, and we stopped. And it's funny, to this day I often ask myself, what if you didn't stop to play that video game? It probably would have made a big difference. At the time, there were these video parlors out, and there was a 24-hour one for kids. And I would go to it with my friend often, and we stopped because I thought, hey, I don't want to go home. I'm just going to get beating when I go home, so I'm going to stay out a little bit longer. I stopped to play Space Invaders or Asteroids, one of those games. And we stayed like in about an hour, and then me and my friend started walking home to the neighborhood. And as I was walking home, we heard, I was right at my friend's doorstep. My best friend was a guy named Eric. And he was 2 blocks away from my house, so we stopped at his doorstep first to drop him off at home. And so Eric and I were kind of saying our goodbyes outside his door when we heard a loud noise ring out, a loud banging sound. And the next thing I knew, it's kind of funny, I felt like it was something that you see in TV only. I felt myself kind of falling to the ground. It felt like kind of a slow motion kind of feeling. And then I realized I was laying on the ground, I was having trouble breathing, and I could barely talk. And I remembered so clearly, Eric thought I was joking. And he said, "Hey, Jerome, get up, come on, get up, stop messing around." And then he realized, he told me years later, he saw a little bit of blood coming from my back. And what had happened was I had been shot by some random person who the police never found out who it was. I lived in these projects that were huge. There were like 20 stories in the projects. And there were like, 5 of them on a block, so it could have come from anybody's window. It could have come from a side alleyway or something. The police never know, and the police, I don't know that they really put in that much effort to find a person because, quite frankly, this is the kind of thing that happens quite often in my neighborhood.